want to make you.
I think we can get started in a minute or so. Courtney, do you have any announcements or anything before I get going?
I did have one announcement. I did send out a job opening. Hold on one second. Let me see if I can find it. I sent it yesterday. Let me see if I can find it. Yes, it's for GFK MRI Simmons. They're looking for a machine learning engineer. I'm not really too informed about the company or the role itself, besides the stuff that I listed for the requirements or the qualifications. That's what they're looking for. If you feel like you can do majority of those things, please send me your resume by 12 today, so that I can follow up with them. I did get a couple of people who were interested in, literally only two. So please send me your resume so that I can follow up with them. Monday, I am meeting with another company. I wanted to share the role, but I wanted to meet with them to get more of an idea of what they're looking for in a candidate. So next week, Monday, I should have another role to send out to you guys. Otherwise, that's all that I have. If you guys need me, you guys know how to reach me, or if you need to book a meeting with me, please let me know. But other than that, you guys have a great Friday. I'll still be here in the background. Zach, I will give you the floor. Thank you for being here for part two.
Of course, of course. Thank you for having me. I'm going to share my screen real quick and present and say hello, everyone. Welcome back. We're about to do part two of the two-part series that we started last week on live coding interviews. Before we get started, I just kind of wanted to check in and see if anyone had tried to get through all of the practice problems, both the SQL and Python problems that we sent out last week or that you worked on last week. Did anyone work on those? And if so, how were they, from like insultingly easy to impossibly difficult, somewhere between? How'd it go? I take that to mean they were easy. So good, good. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions about those. We're going to have more practice problems for you today. So that will be at the end. But before we get into that, just like last time, we're going to have a lecture or question answer session, and then the actual practice session there at the very end. So if you remember in part one, we talked about what to expect from a live coding interview, how it's all set up, all those sorts of things. Today, we're going to focus more on what makes a successful interview. What is it more than just solving the problem? So again, we'll do that and then get into the practice session as well. So let's get into it. What makes a successful interview? Of course, when you're dealing with a live coding challenge, solving the problem is first and foremost. If you solve the problem, you'll probably pass. If you don't, less likely. And that's just kind of the way it is. But I will say, from, again, experience on both sides, doing a lot of live coding interviews as a candidate, but also conducting live coding interviews like from the other side. From both of those experiences, I've seen that there's a lot more to it than just, did this person solve the problem, yes or no? And these are some things that, for candidates that do solve the problem, can separate the good ones from the great ones. But also, and I've seen this again from experience, can really save an interview if you don't perfectly solve the problem, get to the final solution. And I say that happened to me a couple times as a candidate, where I didn't get the final solution. I didn't get all the way through all of the problems, but I think I did these other things, and that's why I was able to make it through to the next round. So what are those things? First and foremost, not rushing into solutions without thinking or planning. I see this all the time. Candidates get kind of flustered, get a little nervous, are presented with a question and just jump straight in. Not only does that make it harder for the actual interview, right? You're going to probably make some mistakes and then have to go back and fix your mistakes and just kind of go by the seat of your pants. But it also kind of shows how you would approach a problem in real life. Are you the kind of data professional who's going to be very careful, check for the things that they need to check for, take a second, breathe, figure out a plan, and then execute on that plan? Or are you just going to rush right in? I definitely want to be more like the former. So when you're presented with a question, take a second, let it sink in. You might be nervous, you might be feeling all sorts of emotions, you might be all hyped up, but just breathe and try and think through what you're about to do and then go and do it. Second thing is contextual awareness or business sense. And you see this most often, I'd say, in a sort of environment where you have actual data to work with. And it doesn't have to be live, real data, but just like you're solving some sort of data problem, not like the algorithm kind of puzzles that you have in some Python interviews that we talked about last week. So it's often, if you remember, we talked about SQL interviews. Pretty much every single SQL interview I've ever done is a list of analytical questions that you solve by writing a query. Those analytical questions are business questions. There's often chances for you to kind of show some contextual awareness, show that you can think about something as more than just a puzzle to solve, but how is my analysis going to be interpreted on the other end? What kind of questions do I have to make sure I'm getting to the right, the right thing that the business needs to see? So, something like, do we want to show all customers or just the customers who made a purchase? Do we want to sum to find, like, do we think of best selling as most revenue or most number of orders made? These kinds of things come up a lot when you're dealing with analytical questions. So the ability to zoom out and say, hey, I know this is a coding problem, I'll have to write the code, but it's also an analytical problem, and show that sort of awareness, that's super, super helpful. And then the last thing is communication. Communication to me is one of the most important things. And here's really why. When you're working on a data team, like you're actually in the real world as a data professional, it's just that you're working on a team. You're going to have your own individual problems to solve, your own code to write, but you'll be a part of a team where you have to, maybe you have a problem with your code and you have to go to somebody and ask them for help. You'll have to communicate what's going on, communicate what you need to solve, and then they'll hit you with some sort of idea, some sort of response. You'll have to be able to take their communication and work it into your code. Or vice versa, they'll come to you with a problem and you'll have to communicate to help them solve it. Or you'll have to present your findings, or you'll have to talk about how you solve some sort of problem. All of this is communication. And I truly believe that the live coding interview is kind of a hidden chance to show that you are competent in that way, to show that you can have those communication skills on top of just being able to write the code and solve the problem. So what I'll say before I go any further is that if you think back to the very beginning of the very first of part one, the very first slide, what I said, the most important thing for a live coding interview, the most important thing is to be comfortable. Remember, the most successful candidates are the ones that are just comfortable in that scenario. So if me sitting here talking about communication while you're just worrying about solving the problem is making you uncomfortable, I'd say don't worry about it. Don't worry about it at all. Again, primary is to feel comfortable so that you can solve the problem. If you solve the problem, you'll probably make it. These are just kind of extra things that can really separate you or help you in a trouble scenario. But if you find yourself in a place where you're comfortable enough to, like, with just coding out a solution to a problem, and you want to take it to the next level, these are the kinds of things to look out for. Cool. Any questions or comments before I move on? And feel free to throw in chat if you don't want to say out loud. Awesome. So with that in mind, talking about communication, I've put together a little list of things that I found myself saying and things that I found the most successful candidates when I'm conducting the interviews actually verbally saying as they're going through the live coding interview. And this is meant to help you kind of structure how you might communicate through this sort of awkward person watching me code scenario. So I'm going to go through these one by one and kind of give a little insight on each. First thing, when you're presented with a question, I always like to repeat the question and ask follow-up questions if necessary. This does two things. One, remember not rushing into things, letting the question sink in. Repeating it is a chance for it to sink into your mind and not rush into a solution. Give yourself a minute to think about it. And then asking follow-up questions not only helps you understand what the interviewer actually wants to see, but also gives you a chance to show that you can show this business context, the contextual awareness. You can think of the problem as more than just like a puzzle to solve. So whenever I'm presented with a question, unless it's super, super simple and I just can breeze right through it, I always like to take this first moment, take a deep breath, kind of work through the question mentally, both by repeating it and asking any follow-up questions that come to mind. I'll say there's really no stupid follow-up question. Anything is going to give you an extra second to think about the problem and help it sink into your mind before you get to coding is a good thing. Next, this is one of my absolute favorite things to say, and I'll say it's especially for when you have actual data that you're working with, like a SQL exercise with a live coding environment, or perhaps a Python exercise where they send you a CSV, you read it in and do some data manipulation. When you have real data, this is what I like to say. Very beginning, first thing, before you even get to solving any problems. Normally, I would do some data validation, check for data size, nulls, unique primary keys, that sort of thing. Is that a good use of time for this exercise, or can we assume the data is clean? Now, two scenarios here. One, the interviewer is going to say, thank you for saying that. Great to know that you would check for all of these things, but we can assume the data is clean for this. We just want to focus on problem solving and the coding skills. This is amazing because you just scored major, major brownie points showing that you are that level of maturity as a data professional that you know to validate data every single time you come to it. You know what to check for, you know what can go wrong, and you know how bad things can be if you don't validate data before running into, using it in any sort of way. So you've checked that box and they will recognize that. They will be appreciative of that. But you don't actually have to do anything. They said, no, the data is clean, so there's no extra work involved. That is one of my favorite scenarios. The other option is that they'll say, you know what, thanks for asking. I think that is a good use of time for this exercise. We should spend some time checking for, problems in the data, cleaning it up a little bit. That's amazing because now you know that's part of the exercise. That's something that they want the candidates to be able to find and not get tripped up over. So you know that you have to go look for messy data now. That's something that happens quite often, especially in a Python exercise. When you're reading in a CSV, they got to make this CSV whatever they want it to be, put in all sorts of data irregularities, and they want you to go find them. They're not going to tell you that you have to go find them unless you ask for it. So here you asked for it, they told you, and you know where to go for the next part of the interview. So this is a fun intro to a live data exercise that I always try to do because it's never going to steer you wrong and can only help in many ways. Next thing, can I take a minute to collect my thoughts? The answer is always going to be yes, and it is incredibly, incredibly valuable. Again, I see this all the time. Candidates come into a live coding interview, they're very nervous, they're excited, they just get straight into things, they end up making mistakes and they have to go back and fix them. This not only shows, like saying, can I take a minute to collect my thoughts, not only shows that you want to be careful, but it gives you the chance to actually come up with the right scenario before you start coding and then making some mistakes. So actually take this time. It'll feel weird the first couple times you do it because it's going to be perfectly silent. And when have you ever been perfectly silent in an interview? It's it feels like it's not what's supposed to be happening. But this is 100% what's supposed to be happening. It is the best thing you can do to put yourself on the right path. So take that minute, collect your thoughts, and start to come up with a plan. Now, what I like to do once I have a plan, again, this is assuming the question isn't super simple and you can just breeze right through it. If it is super simple and you can breeze right through it, go ahead, do that. But if there's a little bit more thought involved, a little bit more planning, I like to kind of give a little preview of that plan. So I'd say something like, my initial plan for this problem is blank, and then walk through very, very high level. And then if there's ever a scenario where you kind of have to make a big choice between one thing or another thing, I like to say why. So what is this doing? First, it's kind of putting you and your interviewer on the same page, right? So they're following along. It's their job to see if you know what you're doing. And if you can make that job easier by putting them on the same page as you, making sure they can follow along, that's going to score you some points as well, or that's going to score you some points first of all. The next thing, you're showing that you know how to communicate about your code. Very important as part of a data team. And the because, whenever you have a chance to say because, that's kind of showing some contextual awareness, showing your thought process, showing that, again, you have some reasoning behind what you're doing here. So an example of that is, well, I think the thing to say here is, you don't want to take them through every single line of code. None of this is taking them through every single line of code. It's kind of a high level overview. So for this, I'm gonna group by, this column, sum, and then order by to make it, a nice output for them, for whoever is looking at this report. And that's it. That's it. So you're not taking them through every single line of code. It's just like, hey, here's what I'm about to do, and then you can get in to do it. Cool. So after you take them through a bit of an initial introduction, you code. You're quiet, take 5-10 minutes, however long it takes. And this is where the communication kind of stops. Again, the first time it might feel kind of awkward because you're just sitting there typing and they're watching you type, but that is completely normal. That is what this is supposed to be. So you're typing, 5-10 minutes. Let's say you get to a certain point where you, kind of forgot the syntax for something, or you're just a little bit blocked. You're right there. You almost know it, but you have to look something up. We talked a little bit last week about how it is always okay to Google something, use your cheat sheets, use whatever resources you need. And if you ever come across a scenario where the interviewer says it is not okay, I ask you to please give them my email address, because I think that is incredibly unfair and I would love to have a chat with them about that. That is not how we work in the normal data world. So it's really, really crazy to think that anyone would not let you look things up during a live coding interview. With that said, it's not cool to look up everything, right? If they say, write a function that deduplicates a list, you don't want to go and type into Google how to deduplicate a list. But it's the little things, the kind of tiny bits and pieces that might slip your mind, little syntax stuff. Those are totally fine to look up. So let's say you get to that kind of point. I always like to kind of, again, communicate about what's going on here, keep the interviewer on the same page, and show that you have this ability to talk about what's going wrong. So all I need to know is blank, just like this tiny little thing. Do you mind if I Google it quickly? The answer will be yes. You'll go and find the answer, put it back into your code. Another thing about this is, again, because we're trying to mirror real life and see how you would work in a data professional setting, if you don't know the answer to something right away, which is common, and you can go to Google or Stack Overflow or your cheat sheet or whatever, find a piece of code and bring it into your solution and solve the problem, that's great. That's showing that you're resourceful. I wouldn't say like fake this thing just to show that you're resourceful, but if you get to this point, it can be a huge plus. It's something that I've definitely written down in my notes when I'm conducting an interview. Candidate didn't know the solution right away, but was able to use Google and find the answer. That mirrors day-to-day life very, very well. So if you get to this point, don't panic. Just a little bit of communication, Google it, find your answer, and bring it in. So moving on a little bit here, let's say you get to a little bit more serious of a scenario where it's not just a quick Google, find the syntax, bring it in. It's kind of, you're stumped by the problem, you're really blocked. Do not panic. I think there are ways through it, and hint, hint, it's going to be kind of through communication. What I would actually say in this scenario is, I think I'm getting blocked here. And then talk through it a little bit. Talk through what you were trying to do, talk through what you see is not working, and maybe some thoughts as to why it's not working. Again, this is very much like the day-to-day life of a data professional. You're going to come into scenarios where you don't know how to solve a problem. You're going to have to go to your boss or manager or colleague or whoever and say, hey, I'm trying to solve this thing. I don't really know what's going on. Here's as far as I've gotten. So showing that you can communicate about this is a good thing, Again, this is the scenario where you're stumped. You might start to panic and think that, you're going to fail the interview, but you're kind of still showing an ability to stay calm and communicate about what's going wrong, because that's what you're going to have to do in your day-to-day work. So you explain it a little bit, and then remember, taking the time is one of the most valuable things you can do. I'm going to take a minute to think of a new approach. Cool. You've communicated a little bit. You've shown that you can talk about data and code in terms of what's going wrong. Now you take a minute, you breathe, you collect your thoughts, and you come to a new solution. Super, super valuable. Let's say you're really stumped. You took a minute to think of a new approach. You didn't quite get there. It's totally okay to go to your interviewer and say, do you have any thoughts on next steps? Hint, hint, they do. They have the solution right in front of them. They're not going to give you the whole solution, but they might give you a little hint. And if you can take that hint and run with it, work it into your code, get to the solution after they just give you a little piece, again, super impressive, because that is the normal day-to-day life of a data professional. You have a problem, you go to someone for help. They don't know the answer 100% because they've never worked on that problem, but they might have an idea. They say, hey, why don't you try this vague idea? And you say, okay, I think that might work. You go and you put it into your code, you work it, and you find a solution. That's it. I mean, that's what I do every single day. So trying to mirror that, if you get to this scenario, is it's a huge positive. It can turn into a real win for you. So this is all to say, if you get to a point where you're working through a coding problem, it's not going so well, you're blocked, it is not the end of the world in any sort of way. There are ways out of it. You just have to remember to stay calm, try and pair with your interviewer a little bit, see if they can help you along if you need it, and then just do your best, do the best that you possibly can. The last thing I'll say here, this is my big disclaimer. None of this is talking while you code. Notice everything was kind of introductions before you actually get to type out a solution, or kind of like midway through when you've hit a real breaking point, or perhaps after. None of this is while you're actually typing. There's a lot, most of the interview is going to be quiet. It's going to be you sitting there typing at the keyboard and them watching you type. And that's how it normally is. If you try to talk through every single line that you're doing, line that you're writing as you write it, that's just too much for any one person to handle thinking, typing, and talking all at the same time. I've made this mistake before. I tried to over communicate. It doesn't go well. So all of these things are kind of introductions, talking before you code, talking after you code, some things to make it go a little more smoothly and show these communication skills. It is definitely not 100% not typing while you code. And remember, priority one is solving the problem. So again, if this is making you uncomfortable, even thinking about talking during the interview, worry about it as little as you have to in order to be comfortable in this scenario. Okay. Before I move on, next I'm going to do a little example of this, but I want to pause and see if anyone has any questions or comments about anything that I've said so far. Great. Cool. Then I'm going to go into the last section here before we go into breakout rooms to practice. Oh, I see that something came through on chat. Yes, not a question. That is the Dropbox. Thank you, Courtney. So example of me, how I would kind of talk through a question. And this is a very common SQL question. I've seen this kind of thing on almost every single SQL interview that I've done. So as a quick side note, just kind of pay attention to how this one is worded and how I walk through a solution. It's likely going to show up in one way or another. So the question is, you have a customers table and a transactions table. What is the average sale price of each customer's most expensive purchase? I'm the interviewee. This question was just posed to me. Okay, great. What do I do? First thing is repeat the question. Again, might seem a little trivial, but it's so helpful to repeat the question, let it sink in a little bit, not rush into anything. So I'd repeat the question like, okay, so we want each customer's most expensive purchase and the average sale price of that. Okay, got it. From there, my favorite line. Normally I would check for nulls, unique primary keys, and validate the join. Is that a good use of time for this exercise, or can we assume the data is clean? And then the interviewer might say, thank you for asking. It's very, very good to know that you would check for those things because that's what we have to check for. But for this exercise, we can assume the data is clean. You could just go ahead without validating anything. Awesome, great. So I scored points and didn't have to do any extra work. Wonderful. Can I take a minute to think of a plan? The answer is going to be yes, and I will. It's going to be quiet. It's going to be maybe a little awkward the first time you do this. And that is what it is. Like that's totally fine. This time is super valuable for you to collect your thoughts, come up with some sort of plan. So I'll do that. I'll collect my thoughts. I'll think of what I have to do. And then I kind of want to walk the interviewer through it a little bit. Here's my initial plan. So I want to join tables on customer ID. Inner join is fine because we know the data is clean. Remember, whenever you have to kind of make a choice, it's good to give a because. Don't just say it or do it, but say why. Helps show a little bit of context. So we know the data is clean, so inner join is going to be totally fine. Then I want to use a window function to rank the purchases, filter to include only the most expensive purchases, and then take the average. That's it. Now I'm going to get to typing. Type, 5-10 minutes, however long it takes, 15-20, doesn't really matter. This is the communication. Now I'm done. Notice how I didn't walk them through literally every single line. I didn't tell them about all the things that could possibly go wrong. I just kind of gave a brief overview, takes 10 seconds, and now they're on the same page. Now they know what to look for. Okay, so I'm typing. I can't quite remember the exact syntax for a window function. Do you mind if I Google it real quick? The answer will be yes. I'll go to Google, maybe find a Stack Overflow article, how to write a window function, get the syntax, copy it, paste it into my solution, edit the things I have to edit. The interviewer is very impressed that I can use my resources, which is what I'm going to have to do every day as a data professional. I get the answer. I say real quick, hey, great, looks like the average is $151.21. They'll say, yes, it is. Well done. You've got the job. Everyone's happy. Any questions about this example that I've just walked through, how I formatted it, the things I said, those sorts of things?
I have a question, Zach. If it was a Python problem like Pandas problem, it would make sense to ask them if you should check for, nulls and stuff. But for the SQL problem, you would anyway be looking for you would anyway initially start with selecting star from both tables in order to look at the primary keys and basically figure out which key to join on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which common fields to join on. So doesn't this question in the case of a SQL problem kind of seem redundant? Probably it's okay to ask if you should check for nulls, but to ask if you should also check for unique primary keys and validate the join just seems to me that it might be a bit much. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I'd say that it's in the real data world, data's messy, and that's just a fact of life. And it's never safe to assume that the data that you have is clean in any sort of way. So select star on each table to see what fields you have and perhaps how big the table is. That's a good start, but how do you know there aren't duplicates in the primary keys? Do you know if there are nulls, and when you're going to be joining, are you going to get problems with nulls or duplicates? Do you know if, if there are mismatches between one table and the other, right? Like if these 10 customers exist in this table but don't exist in the other table. These are kind of the high level questions that are what you would have to do when you're presented with pretty much any data set in the real world. It's the kind of checklist that I go through every single time that I'm presented with a new data set. That can happen in a SQL database, right? A well-designed SQL database, you'll have less issues. But if you're getting data from a SQL database and it wasn't perfectly designed or just kind of data was thrown in there, you'll have to validate this stuff as well. So I think this is all to say that if you don't spend time validating or ask if you should spend time validating, you might be okay in the case of a live coding interview because sometimes they're not really trying to trip you up. But in the real world, these are the kinds of things you check for every single time, or else you might have like you just need to know the full structure of the data before you get into something. So if you're in the interview and you show that you know that you should check for these things every single time, then the interviewer is going to say, great, like this person kind of understands, has that level of maturity as a data professional. They know that they need to check this stuff. That's a really, really good sign.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, does that make sense? I mean, I think you make a good point that this feels a little optional, and I'd say because it is, but does that make sense as to why it's helpful, why it could show the interview good signs?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Great question. Cool. Any other questions? Awesome. So we're about to get into practice problems. If you check the Dropbox link that Courtney just put in the chat, you should see a few different files today. There should be a SQL file, a Python file, and a Python bonus file. These are all new, totally different from last week, and you'll have these to practice on at your leisure. Today we're going to work on Python, not the Python bonus, but Python. And quick note about the SQL and the Python bonus questions. Last week we talked about how you might have a live coding interview that takes place just in a non like in a text file or in a Google Doc or something like that. This SQL exercise that you have here is just a text file. It's not real data. So it's kind of to get that practice of what does it mean to try and type out a solution without being able to run the code and see the answer. Just like type and get as close to perfect as you can. The Python bonus questions are the same exact questions as the SQL questions today, but in Python. So I mock up a little bit of fake data, and then you can use pandas to try and find answers to the same questions. I think it's really important to be able to translate quickly between the two languages. So those are things you can work on your own. Today, when we put you in breakout rooms, please work on the Python file, just the Python questions. These are kind of algorithm questions. And again, just like last week, share your screen, practice together. This is all to really take advantage of this moment to get used to what it feels like to have someone watch you code, have someone try and work through a challenge, or have someone watch you try to work through a challenge. So really, really take advantage of this time here. With that, I'm going to stop sharing and start setting up the breakout rooms. In the meantime, was anyone not able to download the Python files or Python file today and see it in a Jupyter notebook? If so, please let me know. All right.
I'm just wondering if you had sent the solutions to the problems last week.
I'm not sure. Courtney, did we get those in the Dropbox from last week?
Yes. Sorry about that, Irene. I had realized yesterday when I was creating the new folder that I didn't put the answers in, but they're in there now.
Oh, okay.
So you
Okay.
can double check them. They should be in there now. Sorry about that, guys.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. So I'm about to open up the rooms and yeah, good luck.